Good day again, everyone. This is Don Larson speaking. I think we're ready to get started now. We've got a nice group of attendees. Again, my name is Don Larson. The main presenter today is going to be Dave Manick with Visual Sight. Dave has a long background in working with technical documentation and working with various graphic software tools used in that environment. So a very qualified authority on this subject. Before we get started, just some of the usual webinar housekeeping rules. All attendees will be muted for the duration of this webinar. If you have any problems, you can use the little chat window that we've got highlighted over here to the right. The voice over computer audio is the recommended audio option. Questions during the webinar can be posted over there on the right in the questions box. One of the things you'll notice over there too, we do have a handout. We've prepared a white paper with the content of this presentation, and that handout, which is a little PDF, you can drag and drop it to your desktop, is available over there. So feel free to grab that at any time. Questions, again, can be posted there, but we'll wait to the end of the webinar to answer those as usual. We're also going to have some interactive polls, which we'll list here for you shortly. And those interactive polls, the results will be live, but they'll be anonymous. So the interactive polls that we're going to have today, which we're going to show immediately after we take them, did give you a little time to ponder these, if you will. The polls today are going to be: does your organization currently create illustrations
Hi, this is David. I just seem to have lost Don's audio, so I'm going to just carry on. So sorry about that, everybody. So we're going to run 4 polls. This is just to give you kind of an overview of what we're going to be asking later on. So don't worry, the questions will be posed during the webinar. Don was going to introduce his company. It looks like his actually internet has dropped off, so apologies for that. Larson's based in Houston, Texas. They were founded in 1984, and it was really founded around graphics technologies and specifically the CGM format. So they've been in the industry for nearly 30 years, or over 30 years. They've developed powerful, innovative CGM graphics software, and it's all based on on open standards. And they also promote the usage of CGM via a VisX reader, which has been free for some time, so you can download that from their website at cgmlarson.com. They're a member of CGM Open, the CGM Open Foundation, and have been for quite a few years, been involved in that community, so they have good knowledge of obviously the format and where it's come from and where it's going in the future. So Larson specializes, as I said, in graphics technologies, but not only for technical publications, but also in the petrochemical industry for geologists and geophysicists. So this is where we would have actually handed over. So hopefully everybody can hear me. It's not a problem with the infrastructure of the whole of GoToWebinar this morning. So we are recording it, so hopefully there'll be a record of what we do this morning anyway. So the event, the webinar this morning, is a build-up really to the 2016 user forum in Seville, Spain. Larson are taking part in the event. They have a booth there and also doing a speech. So if you are attending, or if you're lucky enough to attend, then please visit the booth at the event. If you want further details about registering, just go to s1000d.org and you will be directed to the event registration and so forth. So the topic this morning is 2D and 3D technical illustrations and graphics, and specifically with relationship to the S1000D specification. So probably all of you are aware of 2D obviously illustrations and probably the CGM format, and this is the format that's required to comply to the specification. But we're also going to look at 3D computer graphics this morning as well and discuss some of the requirements for them in the spec as well. So we've split it into 4 main sections. We have, and this is all based on issue 4.1. This is the latest version of the specification. There is a new one slated to arrive, but it's not here yet. So this is all based on 4.1. So as I said, we split it into 4 sections. On the right here, we see the chapter number. So this will hopefully give you good reference if you do download the spec, that you can go directly to what we're talking about this morning. So it's a good reference point to start from. So we're going to look at authoring 2D illustrations, authoring 3D content, identifying data through the information control number, and also talk specifically about CGM and some of the requirements on that as well. So we're going to start with our first poll. We have 4 in all. Hopefully we get some feedback. As I said, it's all anonymous, as Don said. So this is really quick and straightforward. So I'm going to launch it now. And we just begin obviously voting, and I'll wait for just everybody as long as I can to don't want to go on too long, and then I'll show you the results. This just gives us an idea of the audience we have this morning. So nearly there. I understand as well that probably not everybody has projects, and it's not that relevant to them. Okay, nearly got 100%, so that's a good start. So I'm going to close it at this point. And hopefully you can now, I'm going to share the results with you. So you can see that we've got a 57% actually do have S1000D projects, so that's great. And 26% no, and not currently planned, but we have a project planned. So that's great. So we've got a really good diverse audience this morning. So thanks for your input there. So the first topic is authoring 2D S1000D illustrations. This again is an extract from the specification. So the chapter that you need to be looking for is 3.9.2. If you're aware of the spec, there's over 3,500 pages, so this should help you pinpoint that particular chapter. We're going to focus on 2 particular parts of that chapter this morning. For the 2D side. The 3D is also in this chapter as well, and we're going to take that separately. So this is a table of contents that you're going to see. So I'm not going to dwell on this too long, because we're going to take out certain parts of this, not all of it, because it would just take too long. We'd be here for a few hours. So we're just going to take out what we think is the more interesting parts. So some of these are the primary rules laid down in the spec, and some of them pretty much common sense, I think. So illustrations must communicate to the user a simple and clear and economical way. So that's probably pretty much what we do with illustrations anyway. So they must visually enhance the technical information required by the user to perform the intended task. So what they're saying is, if text will do it, then just use text, but if an illustration is going to help, then use it. and it must be prepared in accordance with the text. Obviously, it must relate to the textual data, so the end user gets the maximum amount of information to do the task. The advised presentation format for print is portrait, but it does allow for landscape illustrations, but these must be something that is declared in your project business rules. Some of this information can be a bit arbitrary because of the fact that I believe S1000D is more suited to an interactive technical manual. So, but it is possible that the manual that's electronic can still print, has the ability to print. So you still have really to take into account the guidelines on print. The ability to print becomes a bigger challenge if you introduce 3D data, because how are you going to represent that in the printed manual? So the guidelines for illustration are really quite detailed, and I think it's really worth looking at these because, in theory, this is the spec which you should adhere to. So we even go down to line weights, line styles, annotations, symbols, the projection, which would usually be isometric, and obviously the page size, which we both spoke about. The information needs to be clear and concise, so it should really just focus on the illustration. The illustration must focus just on the task in hand. So any extraneous information should be either removed or just grayed out, like a ghosted type image. It's usually monochrome as a rule, but this is probably predominantly about the print, going to print, that usually black and white is cheaper to print. But in an electronic manual, then the use of color to actually have clarity, add clarity, is now possible. So this is what we call a business rules decision point. So if you're not familiar with the spec, there's a lot of these throughout the spec where you make a decision on what you're going to actually do for that project. So there is one for the use of color in the final deliverable. So we're going to talk about the use of color, and also we're not going to speak about photographs. Personally, I think photographs can contain a lot of extraneous data, so I think an illustration is always better. So as with the illustration itself, there's also some specific guidelines around the use of color, and that there is a specific color palette that you should use if you're going to color an illustration. And the specs provide some really good examples of illustrations and how to use the color. In the case on the right, it's used to denote a hierarchical structure to the illustration. So light blue are the parts, and then the grey are parts that are shown on subsequent illustrations. So they could be links, like a hotspot that take you to that illustration. You can also see that it's quite small, but the detail arrows and the letter in a specific color as well in the blue, which is outlined in the spec. So we get to our second poll, and this is a precursor to the next section, which is really around 3D. So I'm going to share the second poll with you. So again, thank you for your input in this. It just helps you as the audience to understand what other people are using, and ourselves as well. So I'll just give you a few more seconds to vote. From my own personal point of view, I think 3D is becoming more important. It's easier to deliver now. The file formats are a lot smaller. So I think it's exciting for the illustration community to use a different way of presenting data. So I'm going to close the poll. I think we've got pretty much everybody on board. And I'm going to share that with you. So this is very even. It's a three-way split between yes, no, and we plan in the future. So encouraging that a third of the audience here this morning is actually using 3D already, which is in some ways surprises me, but I think it's a good thing. So I'm going to hide at this point the bowl, and we'll move on. So as I said, we're going to look at the authoring of 3D content. So this is in the spec already. It's not that detailed, not as detailed as the 2D side. This is the specific part of that chapter. And we're just going to pick out the key points from it. So it provides some basic guidelines on the use of 3D interactive graphics. It also specifies that the production of 3D content must be from a verified and authoritative source. So in other words, an engineering system that you know is the source of the data. It's recommended where procedures might be complex, and it will give a benefit to the user. So to me, that's common sense again, that you want to use it in specific areas, not everywhere, because it would be costly probably to use 3D throughout the manual. Currently there's no recommended file format for 3D delivery. So with 2D you have CGM, and there's other formats as well like TIFF specified, but for 3D there is no file format. There was a team working on the 3D area of the spec, and issue 4.2 is due, so at that point I'm not sure if they're going to actually prescribe a 3D format. Will be interesting to see. So what's the definition of 3D? So these are images dynamically generated from engineering models or other production systems. It's usually going to be included in an IETP, an interactive electronic technical publication. I suppose it could be standalone as well, but I would usually see it integrated into the overall manual. If a 2D printed manual is still required alongside the IETP, then you've got to think about how that 3D data is rendered in the 2D manual. And when should you use the 3D data? So we've already said complex maintenance and assembly, disassembly type procedures, enabling the viewing of hidden information. So one thing I didn't mention at the beginning is that we'd have kind of some little demos as well. So this is quite an interesting example. It is three-dimensional. Okay, was. So let's, okay, let me just close this down. It's not, let's launch it again. So this is a PDF file. So not a lot of people are aware that PDF can actually contain 3D information. So that hidden information I was talking about, I can move it around and I can look underneath this axle here. So, and now I can just move along here. I've got different views already created of this of the single item, or I could use the interactive part here of the BOM. So I could just go and look at individual parts of this. So you can see that with 3D that we could easily now integrate into our manuals, even using a PDF format. So I think the technology is there to deliver that 3D data. Apologies for that not working straight away. So also interactive information benefits the users. So there was some interaction with that, but you could also build in animation how to actually explode the parts away or assemble, disassemble. So at the beginning I said it would needed to be from an original validated engineering source. The removed parts, so these are some of the guidelines. Removed parts must remain in view throughout the maintenance procedure. So in other words, if you've got this 3D file, the parts can't be removed and then disappear. They have to remain visible. Callouts and navigation icons must not move during the animation sequence. I'm not sure how feasible that is. That would be a challenge to actually do that. So kind of disagree with that guideline, to be honest. The removal of parts and use of tools must be rendered realistically. So if you're introducing other elements, say as a tool, the screwdriver, then it must obviously look like a screwdriver and act like one. When moving parts or actions are animated, appropriate warnings and cautions must be displayed. I think, again, this is common sense that you would actually put those on there. And they should also have the ability to be acknowledged by the user before proceeding. Well, that will be a challenge of the software that you're using. Does it enable you to do that? The other option, though, is to put the textual warning before the animation begins, so you could actually have a separate file that warns the user before the animation begins. The use of colour on 3D, then we refer back to the earlier chapter for some of the guidelines, but there are very specific ones for 3D. So red should be used to emphasize critical objects or information. Colour rules do not apply to realistically rendered surfaces and parts. 3D tools and heavy objects must have an amber surface. Again, a bit of a challenge for your software to do this. Hidden objects for removal must appear in light blue. So again, very specific guidelines on how you deliver your 3D data in relation to S1000D. All colour applied to 3D objects must add value to the users. Navigation symbols in blue, which is similar to the 2D, and the black and white line art with light blue fill can be used to identify, as I said, the detail items. So my takeaway from that is that there's a very heavy dependency on the software that you're using to achieve these requirements. In other words, it's got to be quite a sophisticated piece of software to achieve this. So now we move away from the 3D, we go into 2D, and we talk about how we identify illustrations or any really objects that are not data modules. So again, quite an extensive section here on the information control number. It used to be called the illustration control number, but now is a general term for anything that could be a photograph, a JPEG, PNG, flash file. So anything really that's an object that is not a data module. But again, it's specifically for illustrations we would use this. So if you're not aware, data modules are all assigned a unique code. So similar to that, ICN is the code we'd use to identify an illustration or a 3D graphic. There's a business rules decision point here again for the presentation of that ICN number. If it's an illustration, then it needs to go in a specific area of the illustration, usually in the lower right. Once we've got our illustration, it's got this code, then it can be reused in data modules. So it can be used again and again in different data modules. You don't have to recode it because it appears somewhere else. And there is two ways of identifying the illustration. There's one called the cage, and the other one is the model identification code. Again, this is another business rules decision point. Which one do you use? From my experience, I have never seen the cage code used. Probably somebody on the audience today will prove me wrong, but I've never seen it used to identify an illustration. The cage is usually more about the originator of the information rather than where the information sits on the platform or in the manual. So more commonly, it's going to be based on the model identification code. So what I mean by that is that at the beginning here, the model will be identified. So that would be the name of the ship or the aeroplane. It will have its own unique code, and the illustration would have that as well. So it actually then belongs to that platform. And then the standard numbering system would then identify where that illustration actually is related to the platform at a deeper level, like the system, the subsystem, or the sub-subsystem. So you can specifically position the illustration where it belongs on the platform. So again, we've got another small demo here. So I thought I'd give you something to see where the ICN then fits into the common source database. So here we've got an example of the database. So you can see here we've got the ICN number, I've got the ability to check it out so as I would a data module, so I can check that illustration out, and then it becomes part of the workflow. So it gives the illustration the ability to be managed like any other piece of information on the S1000D project. The other nice thing is here is that I can actually view the graphic before I insert it into my data. So I've got a visual representation that I can look at. It even shows me the hotspots. There's hotspots on this particular graphic. So I think it shows that the illustration lives in the project. It could be a photograph. It could be a CGM file. It could be even be a let's go down a bit further. It could even be a flash file. So so the ICN is it relates to illustrations, but also to other data types as well. So just a quick demo. So we come to our third poll. What graphic types does your organization currently use in its publishing process? So I'm just going to launch this poll now. Again, thanks for your input so far. This is obviously a bit more detailed. We've got quite a few for you to answer, and it's multiple. It should give you the ability to do multiple answers as well, I hope. So we'll give you a few more seconds. So I think this is interesting with the graphic types. We have a limitation within the software within GoToWebinar that we can only have 5 answers. So we'd like to have put more down there, but we only have 5. So I think we're virtually there. Okay, that's great. I'm going to close it down and I'll share the results with you. So we've got 55% with CGM, which is got a good qualified audience. Interestingly, we've got 41% SVG. That's an interesting number. And Adobe Illustrator 51. So again, interesting that Adobe Illustrator files are being used. You could also be PDFs as well, I suppose. 80% 3D and 23% 2D. So interesting. We have got 3D graphics being used as well. So now we come to the final section, which was CGM. So we've obviously got some qualified CGM people on the webinar today. So this is it's quite an extensive section. So it's chapter 7.3.2 as your reference point if you want to go and read up. Just to give you some brief background on the format, if you're not aware, the computer graphics meta file is the acronym or CGM acronym. It's a 2D open graphics format, not owned, non-proprietary. It's managed by the CGM Open Foundation. You can find them at cgmopen.org. Larson is a member of that organization. The CGM format first appeared in the 1980s, so it's getting on, but it's still here and it's still widely used. So that's the good news. And I think the reason for its longevity is it's open. So it can be supported in lots of different graphic softwares. It is part of S1000D, as obviously we've actually highlighted in the past webinars and so forth. So it is an important format if you want to deliver compliant files to the specification. It's also part of W3C as well. So it is WebCGM, which was adopted by the S1000D community, is part of the World Wide Web Consortium. In fact, I apologize because I think I had the poll still up there. So let's just move on from that. I apologize for that. So the table of contents, as I said, is quite extensive. It looks at all versions of CGM. So we're on version 4 at the moment, but we look back to version 1, 2, and 3 as well. we'll look at the terminology, we'll look at hotspotting in the specs. So there's all these guidelines are in the specification. So again, quite a detailed information on the CGM format. But it's not only used in S1000D. So if you work in the commercial aerospace industry, then you've also got the iSpec 2200 specification, and you've also got the petrochemical industry uses CGM as well. So what are profiles? They can be thought of as rules for the graphic. So with the textual information, you usually have a schema that dictate rules. With a graphic, it's really the profile. And this is one of the unique things about CGM, that it has these profiles. So something like SVG, for instance, doesn't have the ability to have profiles, so difficult to validate against, and also not easy to have an interoperable file. So these profiles can also cascade as well. So this is why we can support things like ATA and also S1000D at the same time. So we have the base, which is the ISO standard, and then we can layer different profiles on top of that, and that includes the S1000D profile. So what are the key benefits of CGM? From my own point of view, it's a great graphics format. It's also interoperable, which is key to large international projects and even in-country projects as well. We could move these files around between different collaboration companies and reuse them very easily. It can contain interactivity, so it can contain hotspots that are actually within the file itself. So they're not on some layer, which you'd have to do perhaps on a TIFF file. So you'd have to manage two files. With CGM, you only have to manage the one. They're also very easy to edit and reuse. So this is obviously key. All the graphical components are preserved. So we'll see this in the graphical attributes. So things like ellipses, circles, Bezier curves, obviously lines, their structure is maintained, so we can possibly use CGM as an archive format as opposed to a proprietary format. Text attributes, usually quite low for illustrations. There's not usually many typefaces used, probably Helvetica or Arial. Probably the main thing you need to be able to do, which CGM allows you to do, is actually constrain the text size. So if more text is added, it doesn't flow into an area where it might cover the illustration, as an example. And also metadata can be contained inside the file. But the spec really only allows you to store the hotspot region and the ID information, and possibly the link itself, where it links to. All the other information needs to go into an XML companion file. And some of the software out there can generate that for you. So we come to the fourth and final poll. I'm going to launch that one for you. Sorry for the confusion on the last one. And again, thank you for your input. This is we will share this in the slides when we distribute them later, so you'll get a little graph of the output from the slides. Obviously, but your name is not, it's all anonymous. So does your project have hotspots? This is an interesting one for me, is that we have this ability for hotspots within the CGM, but not many companies and projects seem to take advantage of that. So I think we're about to close again. I'm going to close that down. Thank you again for your input. And I'm going to share it with you. Hopefully I remember to hide it this time. So we've got 40% yes, 45% no, 20% we plan in the future. So that kind of doesn't surprise me. And what I would like to have seen is more people, because we've got a few people on the call today who use CGM, is actually using interactivity more. That's the whole point of an interactive manual. So I'm going to hide that again. Okay. So I have another short demo here. So to actually create hotspots on an illustration, you need some software capable of doing that. So this particular illustration, just a simple kind of spare parts illustration. On the right, we've got a tree with the hotspot information in it. So if I click on the tree here, we highlight it on this side. So I want to see all the hotspots on this illustration. Here they are. So you do need something specific to create CGMs to, say, the S1000D specification, but they're very easy to do. You can have automated ways of doing it as well. So this is my surprise, is that perhaps if they're not using it, it could be cost, but there's lots of ways of actually doing it automatically. So cost shouldn't be too much of an issue. I'm also going to save as here, so we can look at the CGM being saved, and here we've got the different profiles we were talking about earlier. So we've got web CGM, we've got the petrochemical industry profile, and we've got the ATA profile as well. So from a software point of view, if you want to be compliant, it's important to these different specs that you get some software that allows you to do that. Okay, so when we want to deliver these hotspotted illustrations, they're probably going to go into an IETM or ITP. Obviously, the CGM file should contain graphical objects, but from a metadata point of view or a hotspot point of view, then it only can be the object ID and the hotspot regions. Anything else, as I said earlier, needs to really go into that XML companion file. So that graphic on the right is taken straight from the spec. You also need some way of viewing these files as well, or your customer does. So when you deliver them, you need a way to actually deliver them in the IETP, and that interactivity comes through. So there's quite a few viewers on the market. They're mainly based on ActiveX controls, but I think this technology now is becoming a bit outdated. A lot of viewers are beginning to go away from it, and that's why I might see today like the SVG format appearing in one of the polls, is that now you want to try to deliver data without a plugin. So ActiveX has caused many security issues for companies, so it's kind of thing that is we're trying to get away from using. And even Edge, Microsoft's Edge, doesn't support ActiveX anymore, and they are really the developers of ActiveX to begin with, and they don't support it in their own software. So Larson have a technology, this will be the final demonstration, where you don't need a viewer now to look at a CGM on the internet. So this technology is based on HTML5, but it is a viewer, but it doesn't need a plugin. So now we're looking at the file within Chrome. We can see the tooltips work that we put in earlier, so it's the same file, but we've got no plugin technology behind it, so it's just purely HTML5. And that's the obviously the attraction of SVG, and now we can do the same with CGM as well. So we can zoom in and so forth, and we can maintain our quality. So viewing has always been something that I think has held CGM back, mainly because of the ActiveX control, although many companies have adopted it. This gives you a way of moving away from it and preserving your archive. So we're now at the end of the webinar. I thank you again for all your input you've provided. So in summary, and I think we'll all agree, graphics are a significant component of an S1000D project. Authoring in 2D and 3D, there are specific rules that you need to look at when you're creating those illustrations. I think you'd really need to consider the software you're going to use to create those and deliver those 3D files, because you need to follow those guidelines. So you're going to need some software that allows you to do that. We looked at the ICN structure, and this is something that you might not do yourselves, depends where you are in the project, but that is important you identify the those illustrations correctly, so where they fit on the platform. And finally, CGM. I still think CGM is a very relevant format. There's obviously software out there that creates those compliant files, but obviously you need to choose the right one to create compliant files. So we're now at the Q&A. So we're just going to pull up the questions panel, and I might just call Don back in at this point to help with the questions. We've got one to begin with here. What is your opinion when choosing a 3D format? So, as I said earlier, there is no guidelines for 3D formats in the spec at the moment. So, yeah, from my point of view, I think you need to choose an open format for 3D. If you go proprietary, then that could give you problems later on down in the project. So I would say you need to really use a open format. So there's various ones. In fact, there's quite a few for 3D. There's U3D, PRC, which is based on PDF. But do some research on that. We did another presentation around that where you can find some more information. So somebody's asked also the question around a reliable 3D format. Again, difficult one to answer. My favorite at the moment is the PRC format, which is based on the 3D PDF. I think that's a really good format to choose. Got another question here. What S1000D viewer and publishing systems are compatible with CGM? Well, there's the Larson viewers compatible. Larson have an ActiveX control and the HTML5 one, which gives you compatibility. And there's also ISAView from PTC, and there's a few others out there as well that give you compatibility. From a publishing or authoring system, then there's PTC's ISADraw, there's VisXedit from Larson, which give you compliant CGM files. Again, there are other pieces of software on the market that will do that. I've got a question here, .smg. I'm not really quite sure what the question is there. Question mark. It possibly was a typo, but it might be .svg or scalable vector graphic. That was one of the other questions. Can I create a compliant SVG file? I think the answer to that is no, because there is nothing in the standard that gives you the guidelines to create a .svg file. It doesn't mean to say you can't use one, but there are no guidelines or profiles for SVG. My main kind of caveat with SVG is I don't see it as being very interoperable. So if you're working on a project where you have to exchange files, then SVG could cause you issues. It's not something else as well that you can read back in very easily, even from the system that you've created it in. So there are some downsides for SVG, definitely. Okay, can I show an example of using S1000D XML with CGM multimedia object? Probably not in this demo, but we can get in contact with you on that and do that as a separate, take it offline. I would like a copy of the slides. Yeah, they will be available. So you will be sent after the presentation is finished today. Probably, I think it usually goes out the day after. You will get a link to the slides. They'll also be so they'll be up on SlideShare. So yes, you will get a copy of the presentation. Also, the white papers, you can drag that over now if you wish. And we've got one final question. Can I import 3D information and make a compliant S1000D illustration. So I think that's really, if you're converting 3D information to a 2D illustration, and the answer is yes, but again you need specific software to do that, such as IsoDraw, which will allow you to do it. And again, there's others out there that allow you to take 3D and create a 2D illustration and output it as a CGM. So I thank you for all those questions, quite a few this morning. Thank you for that. And we'll just go to the closing information. Unfortunately, I think Don lost his internet connection, so couldn't join me for the questions. So hopefully I've answered them all correctly from his point of view. So supporting information. We mentioned the slides, they'll be available. We have the white paper. So the white paper is available now. You can either get it from the materials part on the handout site on the webinar, or you can download it later. We have an infographic on CGM, which you can again get from the SlideShare, and there's the address for getting these materials. Not all of them are there yet, but they will be later today. And the next event that Larson are participating in is the 2016 S1000D User Forum. That's in Seville, Spain, if you're lucky enough to go, on the 26th and 29th, or between the 26th and 29th of September. So only a few weeks away. So at this point, I'd like to close. I just might have one, I'm not sure if I've got one more question. No, I think we're good. So thank you for your attention this morning. I hope you've enjoyed the session. And if you have any questions, then you have our email addresses, and we'll be happy to help you. So have a great day, and goodbye from Larson Software. Thank you.